Hello, and welcome to Career Landscapes, a peek into professional lives, brought to you by One Voice for Change. I'm your host, Felicity Minch, and today we have the joy of speaking with chemist Carlisle Momberger. And I would like to take a moment and read a little bit about her. Following college, I pursued research, but eventually shifted gears to focus on art. However, my passion for chemistry never faded, leading me back to the field in my current role. I specialize in producing active pharmaceutical ingredients, the concentrated forms of drugs sent to pharmaceutical companies for medicine production. My work involves handling hazardous chemicals, potent bioactive drug intermediates, and pyrophoric substances. I've also worked with automated synthesizers and large-scale plant equipment to build peptides. While my initial aspiration was to save the world through research, I've found fulfillment in my current position, contributing to the essential machinery of the medical industry. Though I may return to the forefront of research someday, for now, I find joy in experimenting with my chemistry set and playing a crucial role in advancing healthcare. Welcome, Carlisle. Thank you for speaking with me today.
Hi, it's great to be here. And I just want to correct one thing in the intro. I don't do experiments anymore. Experimental chemistry is
Uh-huh.
only for research, and I am working in production. So I'm working with a known procedure that's already been established, whether that's for something that is going to be sold as a product or if it's just something that's in development from a company. The production world is a little different for sure than the experimental world.
Oh, great, great. Thank you. I was just reading your biography, and you've done a lot. Can you just tell me a little bit about your career, a little bit, an overall bit about your career as a chemist?
Yeah. So I majored in chemistry in college and I did some research on a doctoral thesis my senior year. I contributed a couple of crystal structures to that word I've never made before. So my name is actually in the Journal of Physical Chemistry for that.
That's
And then
cool.
after college, I did some research at a small company for a little while. At that same company, I was also doing atomic deposition of spinal implants being coated in titanium, which was really cool. And then the pandemic hit. And since the place I was working was mostly medically based, there wasn't really a demand for anything we were doing for a while. So I knew I was going to get laid off, and I just went ahead and left. And I went and I sewed masks for the pandemic for a little while. I worked at a jigsaw puzzle company, which was very interesting. I worked for some other small sewing companies, and I worked for David's Bridal for a little bit. And then I missed the lab and I wanted to go back to chemistry. So I ended up finding my current job where I'm in the lab all the time, and it's great.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. Did you know you wanted to be a chemist in high school? And what was it like in high school for you?
I wasn't really sure what I wanted in high school. I briefly thought that I wanted to go to music school to either be a choir director or a professional pianist or something like that. But in the process of looking into auditions and everything, I kind of realized that I was going to have to perform a lot of music that I didn't necessarily like and didn't necessarily want to learn. And so it kind of occurred to me that I was going to be turning the thing that I love the most into a job. And so that kind of freaked me out. And I decided the safer route would probably just to go with chemistry. And I always really liked chemistry. I think it's a beautiful science and I love being in the lab. And my dad was a chemistry teacher my whole life. So maybe that has something to do with my connection to it. But yeah, I just decided to go in for a chemistry major and I just continued to love it. And it's something that is, always going to give me job security being able to do that, which is really nice. But it's also something that I have a deep connection to. So it was the right move for me.
Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. And it's great that you kept up your music and are keeping up music. That's beautiful. The students have tons of questions for you. And one asked, what advice do you have um, for a high school kid who wants to go into chemistry as a career?
Yeah, so my advice if you want to go into chemistry, definitely look into your college's chemistry program because some chemistry programs are definitely going to prepare you better for the working world than others. I would say go for whatever program you can find that's going to get you the most lab time because that's obviously going to give you a better idea for if you want to actually work in a lab or not. And same for research. A lot of people go in wanting to do research because, like me, it's like, oh, I'm going to be a great scientist and I'm going to invent something that changes everything. But research it's a long, slow process, and funding can be unreliable depending on who you're working for. And it's very collaborative. So if you have the opportunity to research in college, I would absolutely take it.
Great advice. And I have to divert. And you had said in your bio that you wanted to save the world through research. What were you thinking when what were your dreams of saving the world?
Well, my parents are very environmentally conscious. They're both original hippies from Boulder in the 80s, you know. And so I kind of grew up with that mindset of climate change always being like right on the horizon. And, you know, I grew up washing our plastic Ziploc bags from peanut butter and jelly at lunch and reusing those because every little thing in our lives was kind of that presence was always in my mind. And so I wanted to go into something environmental. I was originally thinking about solar panels, and waste treatment is a huge thing, especially in the scientific industry, right? We're generating hazardous waste that needs to be disposed of properly so it doesn't harm the environment. And science is in that way kind of a double-edged sword because we use a lot of disposable plastic things and it takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of water in order to make any science happen. So we have to be really conscious of how we deal with all of that environmentally speaking. But I have definitely found that being in a production environment is really good for me. Research was a little bit too slow of a pace for my liking personally. And I've found a lot of peace in the fact that I'm part of a machine that keeps so many people alive making medicine.
Yeah.
So that's kind of it's nice to be in a job that's more focused on helping people in the here and now as opposed to, you know, stressing out about the future and all of the uncertainty around it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's incredible. I've got an 18-year-old that wanted to ask you what different kinds of jobs are available in chemistry.
So yeah, my job is a synthetic job right now, which means just I'm in the lab making a product, basically doing what I learned to do in my college labs and stuff.
Mhm.
Of course, there are research positions where it's a little bit of everything. You've got to plan out your research, you've got to do the synthesis, you've got to do the analysis, you've got to make presentations and stuff. So that's a little more all encompassing, but it also gets a little more bureaucratic because depending on where you are, your funding might be directly tied to the results you're producing, or you know, just the economic climate at the time. There's definitely a lot of jobs in QC, which is something that I'm actually about to go into, which is basically just a lot of analytical chemistry, making sure that every material that we're using is what it says it is on the bottle, and every step that the chemists do in the synthetic labs, we make sure that they made what they thought they made and it's pure and it's right. And so we also have to test the stability of drugs so that we can put an expiration date on it, right? So we've got stability chambers that we go in and test how long does it take for it to degrade, what temperatures can it be at, does it, you know, react to exposure to oxygen and everything like that. So there are a lot of different fields you can go into with chemistry. I would definitely say QC is something that is going to be widely available because there are so many companies, whether they're chemistry based companies or not, that need a QC chemist.
Mhm.
So in terms of versatility, QC is really good. But in terms of day to day being similar to what you do in the lab, I would say synthesis. And usually the pay is better for synthesis because you're making a product.
Yeah, true. What about aerospace? The field of aerospace, are chemists needed in aerospace
Um,
industry?
Certainly. I think a lot of the chemistry that goes into aerospace is going to be material science.
Mm.
This isn't my field, but in terms of having materials that are going to survive in space and be light enough to travel the way that they need to, definitely having really powerful semiconductors and stuff, all of the electrical equipment that goes into it needs to be chemically sound. The thing is with space is that it's inert. So there's nothing that's going to chemically react in space, right? There's no oxygen, there's no molecules in the air at all. It's just nothing. So you don't really have to worry about chemistry too much in terms of like a spacecraft that's just flying. But I will say that all of the analysis that we do in space, the way that we can tell like what other stars and planets are made out of is through spectroscopy, which is basically where, based on the wavelengths of light that you're seeing, you can tell which atoms and molecules are making up that substance. And so that is definitely something that chemists do all the time.
Hmm, interesting. It's fascinating field. I have a 15-year-old who asked, what are the biggest challenges that you face in your work?
What are the biggest challenges that I face in my work? Well, definitely. Well, I mean, I've had so many different jobs because I'm a little bit restless and I like to switch jobs all the time. But so I face different challenges and different types of work. Currently, I would say the schedule can be a really big challenge if you're working in a manufacturing environment. My current schedule is 12-hour shifts,
Yeah.
7 shifts every 2 weeks. So I get a couple days on, a couple days off for 2 weeks. And it's really great for me. I love my schedule, but some people have a hard time with that. And I'm working the overnight schedule, which again I like, but some people really do not like. So just check that out if you're going into a manufacturing environment. But I would say just generally, chemistry requires a lot of patience and precision. And so it can be very tempting when you know what you're doing and you get excited and you're like, okay, yeah, I'm good at this. I can just do it. But it's still every step along the way. You need to check your work, you need to document everything, you need to prepare everything, you need to double check, you need to make your lab partner double check what you did. So it's all very you're never going to go as fast as you want to go. You're never going to be the mad scientist that's just mixing things willy-nilly because you'll blow someone up, or you
Yeah.
can't. So it's a lot of patience.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of collaboration. I assume you've got to
Mhm.
be able to get along with people and really have collaborative skills.
Absolutely.
Oh, great. A 17-year-old asks, although we're covering this, are there any specific skills or qualities that are particularly important for the success as a chemist? You mentioned patience, collaboration, um, anything else that would create a
Yeah.
success in the
Yeah,
field?
definitely planning ahead is a huge part of it. And that's something, it's obviously not exclusive to chemistry. Also being a seamstress, if you're making a sewing pattern, then you know the importance of planning far
Yeah.
ahead into the future before you make any moves at all.
Mhm.
But with chemistry, things can be time sensitive, right? Sometimes you need to do something right away because you need to only have it at this temperature for a certain amount of time before the next reagent goes in, or you need to um, only let it react for a certain amount of time and cool it down right away, things like that. So it's very panic inducing if it's time to do something and the lab isn't prepared for it. So you need to set everything up beforehand. Anytime you have a free second, look at the next thing you can do ahead of time and make sure that the gears are always turning and you're ready for the next step long before it happens.
Great. A sixth grade student asked, what is a typical day like for you?
Well, a typical day is like I said, 12 hours long. It's definitely some periods of waiting. If I'm working out in the bigger plants, we've got vessels that are thousands of liters. So if you're transferring, several hundred liters from one vessel to another, it takes a while and you got to sit around. Or, the huge vessel like that heating up, it takes a long time to heat up. You're going to sit around. So there's definitely an element of like being able to use your time wisely and keep setting yourself up for the future when you do have that downtime. But sometimes you just sit around, and other times it's so fast paced in the lab that the day flies by and you can't believe your shift is over already. One of my favorite things is when we do chromatography in the high potent drugs. Basically, chromatography is that you send your liquid solution through a column that has chemical properties that are different than the liquid that's being sent through. So some molecules want to stay on the column and some molecules want to go with the liquid. And so that way you're able to separate out the components of what you put in there. And so when we're doing that, you want to take a lot of different cuts out of that so that you can get the exact moment where it changes from what you don't want from what you do want. So when we're doing that, you've got one guy on the machine watching the chart saying, now, this is when we need to do it. And you've got one guy clicking the buttons on the machine, switching to the different valves. And you've got one guy in the hood with the bottles, switching the bottles out to catch the different cuts. And you've got another guy taking those bottles, making sure they're labeled correctly, making sure they're sealed safely, and bringing them over to me for analysis, where we take the samples of everything and spot it on a TLC plate and see which cuts are going to be product and which ones are going to go to waste. And so those days are great because we have to be a machine. Everyone has to be laser focused, completely aware of what everyone else in the room is doing, right? You have to move smoothly because this is not something that you want to spill on yourself. So those are really fun days. I love the fast-paced days.
And do you wear protective clothing? You said you didn't want to spill things on yourself. Do you ever wear protective clothing?
Yeah, I mean, in the regular lab, we don't wear anything too extravagant. Basically, we will put on like our daily PPE, personal protective equipment, is just a lab coat, gloves, and the safety goggles. If you're out in the plants, then you also need to wear a hard hat. But sometimes if you're working with large quantities of something that's either going to be really fumy or really powdery, and you could aspirate the powder, which is very bad, then you have to put on the air hood, which is just a face shield and a complete hood with a hose in the back that like pumps your personal air supply. And then you can wear the full body suit or the apron and everything. There are different levels of it for different hazard conditions, but I certainly have worn the marshmallow suit a few times.
Oh, that's great. And another kid asked, how do you think artificial intelligence will affect chemistry in the future?
Yeah, so I think artificial intelligence will be great at developing procedures. Definitely in a manufacturing environment, especially one that's regulated by the FDA, you need to have your procedures include every little bit of detail along the way. That's, even a lot of things that if you're a chemist, it's like second nature that you're going to do this, but it needs to be signed off that this did indeed happen so we can guarantee that we've made the product we intended to make, right? And so I think the AI will be generating those documents for us pretty soon. I think that in terms of the engineering, scaling up the setups, that would probably happen really soon. I don't really foresee AI encroaching on the actual synthesis very much because we already have automated synthesizers that are, put this much here and heat it up to this temperature and stir it for this long. And like we already have that type of automation, and there's still so much that we need to do by hand. Partially because, getting a machine to handle all of the different reagents that we use would be ridiculous to have them all in like a vending machine setting for a machine to go get them. It would be physically absurd to have that. But also just because chemistry can be finicky, based on the temperature and the humidity in the room, it might behave just a little bit differently. So you have to watch it and you have to know what's it supposed to look like before I move on, and what can I do to make this behave the way that I want it to behave. And that's only going to come from human experience.
That's interesting. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, thank you. We're coming to the close of our interview, but I end every interview with 3 questions. And the first one is, what one piece of advice would you give young people today?
Yeah. So I would definitely give the piece of advice not to close yourself into a box, not to commit yourself fully to something too early, because I obviously have had a little bit of a sporadic career. I left chemistry and then I came back and I've worked in different fields and everything. And it's a good thing to have a lot of variety. And I feel like so many high school students, and I was kind of like this too. You're doing well in high school and you got great grades and your SAT scores and your AP scores, and you got into the college that you wanted. And it's like, okay, I know myself. I know what I'm doing. I know what the world is like. I know my field. It's going to be great. And then you get laser focused.
Yeah.
And in the real world, when you're out there working, there are so many types of experiences that are going to help you that you might not even realize are going to be helpful until years down the line. And so I would just say, if you stray from the path because that's what your heart is telling you to do it. You can always go back to the path. And if you get an experience that changes you, that's great. I mean, that's better than having one goal for your entire life. You have to find yourself and you have to not be afraid to let something go in order to do that.
Yeah. Great advice. The second question is, what gives you hope?
What gives me hope is that the men in my lab are so good to me. I have always been the only woman in the lab, and I'm sure, I don't think my new QC position, I don't think I'll be the only woman, but in every other chemistry job I had, I was the only woman in the lab.
Oh,
And that's something that could be really nerve-wracking for a lot of people. And I do sometimes feel not any judgment, but sometimes, the older men in my labs will sometimes speak to me a little bit differently, or like I can tell that they're very aware of the fact that I'm a woman. But everybody my age is just so supportive, doesn't treat me any differently than anyone else. Like that, in that regard, I don't fear for the future at all.
oh, great. Oh, that's great to hear. And the last question, who inspires you?
Personally, I am largely inspired by Albert Einstein, and I might be a little biased because I'm reading a biography about him right now. But basically, nobody really took him seriously until he was about 30. He was not getting along with his professors. He moved around a lot and went to different schools. He was lucky to get a job in a patent office just because he, had a friend of a friend who got him that job. And he was obviously way too brilliant for that. But even he acknowledged that he needed to spend that time getting his head out of the clouds and doing some engineering so that he could be productive in the scientific field. So Einstein would give you the same advice I gave you, which is follow your heart and also get some variety. But he, scientists didn't take him seriously because his scientific process was all based on curiosity and intuition, because the things that he was saying could not be tested with the technology at the time. They did not have the technology. And so it took a long time for him to be appreciated for the genius that he was. But he was stubbornly optimistic and he believed in himself. He followed his heart and he was whimsical. And so the fact that you can be that way and find a path to the greatest success is very reassuring to me.
Definitely. Oh, I tell students, you follow your intuition. Your intuition will not lead you wrong.
Yeah.
It's such an important skill.
Which
And
is,
that's something that is not brought up in school at all.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that the reason that people don't do that, or that people don't teach that in school, is because some people can be impulsive. I certainly can be a little reckless and impulsive. But at the same time, it's like if you have a gut feeling about something, there's a reason for it. And it
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily mean you need to do exactly what that feeling is telling you, but you need to find out the reason for it because every gut feeling you have matters,
Yes,
I think.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that gut feeling needs to be explored, like you
Yes.
said. It needs to, you need to pay attention to it and wonder and use curiosity to wonder about it. And
Mhm.
what is it saying and where is it coming from? And yeah, it's an important voice.
Yeah.
Oh
And I think
gosh.
especially those of us in the scientific field, we try to calculate everything. And sometimes the answer is to just follow your heart and just accept it.
Yes, yes. Oh, great. Well, thank you. This has been a wonderful interview. Thank you for your time. Good luck on your new job.
Thank you.
Quality control. I'd love to have you back in a few months and you could talk about that career.
Yeah.
And thank you for your time. The students will love this, and it's been a pleasure.
Yes, it has. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
All right, thank you. And everybody, thank you so much for listening. And you will find all the links below to One Voice for Change and Carlisle. And thank you for watching, and we will see you later. Until next time, bye-bye.